Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, 2 weeks of conflict in Ethiopia have prompted UN warnings of a dire humanitarian crisis. The war between the government and the northern region of Tigray continues. On Tuesday, troops marched on Mekele, the Tigrayan capital. Also, the north and east of Burkina Faso have been heavily hit by terrorist attacks. Since 2015, the 1 million people forced from their homes will find it difficult to vote in Sunday's presidential election. And Central African pygmies' traditional music and dance style continues to wow crowds. The name translates as the dance of the caterpillars. We take a closer look. But first, 2 weeks of conflict in Ethiopia have prompted UN warnings of a dire humanitarian crisis. The war between the government and the northern region of Tigray continues. On Tuesday, troops marched on Mekele, the Tigrayan capital, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed claimed that federal forces had won significant victories against fighters of the local ruling party, the TPLF. Now, he's accused them of staging an armed revolt. Tigrayan rockets have been fired into neighboring Eritrea, escalating a crisis that has already cost hundreds of lives and forced about 30,000 refugees into Sudan.
This is an influx unseen over the last 2 decades in this part of Sudan. Women, men, and children are crossing the border at the rate of 4,000 people per day since 10th of November, rapidly overwhelming the humanitarian response capacity on the ground. The humanitarian situation as a result of this crisis is growing rapidly. UNHCR reiterates its call for peace and urges all parties to respect the safety and security for all civilians in Tigray.
Well, Abiy's forces have attacked the well-armed region by ground and air. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate has said that he'll only negotiate when the rule of law is restored in Tigray. But that is easier said than done. Michaela Rong is a specialist in East African affairs, and she joins us now. Michaela, now Ethiopia seems to think it can wrap all this up soon. Do you think that's likely?
Well, I think the prediction that we can see the end of the war by Christmas has been made many times throughout history and often tends to be bitterly ironic. I think we can't make any predictions about a rapid end to this conflict. What you're dealing with in Tigray is a movement that has a long history of warfare, guerrilla warfare. The TPLF, after all, won control of Ethiopia thanks to a long campaign that it waged against the Derg and the communist dictator Mengistu. So this is an organization that knows how to wage war. And also this is an organization that in the form of the Northern Command, which we assume has largely defected, mutinied, taken the side of the TPLF, has a very well-armed, very well-trained and very experienced military force at its command. So I wouldn't be making too many predictions at this stage of the game.
I mentioned earlier that the Tigrayans had taken responsibility for firing rockets into Eritrea. Now, why would they explicitly fire on a neighboring country when it's Addis that is their enemy?
Well, it's a very provocative move, and it's a very daring move, because after all, that means that Tigray is going to be, on one hand, to the south, it's got a hostile army, the Ethiopian army, which has declared its intention to remove the TPLF from power. And then it would mean to the north and regarding access to the sea, it's also got a hostile government. So it internationalizes the war. But I assume that the TPLF would say the Eritreans have been involved in this war since the start. They just haven't been open about it. They haven't been honest about it. The TPLF has been saying that the Eritreans have had people fighting inside Tigray from the get-go, and also that the Eritreans are allowing the Ethiopian army access via the Eritrean border area. So I think as far as the TPLF were concerned, they were saying, we know what you're up to, and don't go any further. But it was obviously a very risky move to open fire on Asmara.
Now, on Tuesday, we saw the US condemning the Tigrayans for their part in the conflict. However, there was no mention of Addis. Has either side attracted more or less criticism from the international community over this war?
I think it's normal that the international community will tend to back the status quo, and the status quo means, backing Abiy Ahmed, who is a Nobel Prize winner after all. But I think in both sides, there's been an element of ratcheting up the tension, of deliberate provocation. Neither side has shown any inclination to tone things down, to go towards the negotiating table. I was just looking at a list of arrest warrants issued by the government in Addis, which has issued arrest warrants for 64 members of the political leadership in Tigray and 32 members of the military leadership. And it has also denounced the TPLF as a terrorist group and has said that it intends to remove it from power. That's a very provocative move, and obviously makes negotiation with those very people pretty much impossible. So I think on both sides, we've seen a deliberate sort of, upping of the ante. There's been no tendency, no indication that either side wants to lessen tensions or find some kind of compromise deal.
Thanks very much. Michaela Wrong there for us, giving us some insight into the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia between the government and Tigray. Look now at some other news. At least 5 people, including police officers, were killed in a suicide bombing in Mogadishu on Tuesday. Witnesses say that the attackers entered a packed restaurant near a police academy before blowing himself up. Al-Shabaab extremists have claimed responsibility for the violence. The group controls parts of southern and central Somalia and often targets high-profile areas in the capital. Zimbabwean teachers have agreed to end a strike and accept a government offer for a 41% pay rise. They'd refused to go back to work in September when classes reopened, saying that inflation of over 471% had eroded their salaries to the point that they were untenable. The new deal would now see that the lowest paid teachers earn a monthly wage of around €206 and the highest around €236. The country's unveiled a new economic recovery plan aiming to bring inflation down to single digits, create 760,000 new jobs, and hit 5% annual growth. And Mali held a state funeral for a former president known as the country's soldier of democracy. Amadou Toumani Touré died aged 72 earlier this month. He steered the nation to free elections and led for a decade before being ousted in a coup in 2012. His exit was followed by jihadist overrunning of the north of the country. They were forced out in a French intervention in 2013, but later spread out operations into the region, eventually targeting Burkina Faso and Niger. Well, today, security is a major issue for Burkina Faso as it ramps up for presidential elections this weekend. The north and east have been heavily hit by terrorist attacks since 2015, leading to 1 million people being forced from their homes. Many will find it difficult to vote on Sunday. Our correspondents report.
This huge IDP camp in Kaya is symbolic of the security crisis Burkina Faso's faced since 2015. This family, like thousands of others, had to flee their village targeted by terrorist attacks. In Ouagadougou, Youssouf Cissé is doing what he can to help the displaced. His association is raising awareness on electoral issues, despite the fact many people here will not be able to vote.
There are some who have had voter cards. There are others who have not. When they started giving out the cards, we approached to talk with them because some displaced people hadn't had cards. There are many who reported that they didn't even have identity cards or even birth certificates because they fled. Their houses were burned down. Others fled and left their papers behind.
The National Independent Electoral Commission has admitted that voting across the country will not be possible.
We need to do tests in the field. Sometimes it has improved, and in other places it has deteriorated. There are other communes where we had registered voters and the situation has really deteriorated. That's the situation, but we have to wait a few more days to be definitively fixed.
At the foot of the statue of former President Thomas Sankara, Civil society activist Serge Bayala is sceptical. For him, the vote isn't a priority for Burkina Faso.
We will have about 1/3 of Burkinabe who will be excluded from the right as Burkinabe citizens. I personally think the priority isn't the elections for a country like Burkina Faso. The priority is to give Burkina Faso back to the people of Burkina Faso and to ensure that there are no citizens whose right to vote will be undermined by insecurity.
According to the Independent Electoral Commission, nearly 1,600 villages located in the red zone of this map, which indicates the insecurity in the country, could not be registered, which will probably deprive thousands of Burkinabe citizens of their right to vote.
Well, Central African pygmies' traditional music and dance style continues to wow crowds. The name translates as the dance of the caterpillars, and its rhythms and sounds have been passed down through generations. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Congo has its rumba and Nigeria its Afrobeat. Less famous is Motengene in the Central African Republic. It's both a dance and a musical style.
La danse Motengene, c'est la danse des chenilles. Ça a été sorti par les pygmées de la République centrafricaine, précisément dans la Lobaye. Donc Motengene, c'est la danse des chenilles. C'est pour cela qu'on exploite cette danse pour nous distinguer un peu de nos frères congolais, les Ivoiriens, les Camerounais, etc.
In this nation that has been ravaged by armed groups in recent years, local bands want to revive this cultural heritage.
Comme vous le savez, la culture, c'est l'identité d'un pays. Et la crise que traverse la République centrafricaine aujourd'hui, elle est culturelle. Donc, il est de notre devoir de promouvoir ce secteur d'activité. Mais il y a une chose qu'il faut reconnaître aussi, c'est que les artistes et les acteurs culturels, dans leur ensemble, ne perçoivent pas les droits d'auteur.
There is no professional record industry here. Musicians struggle. They make small sums of money when they play in clubs or weddings. Despite these hardships, their passion for Motengene is stronger than ever.
Awesome. Well, that's it, though, for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.